Hello, and thank you for being here today. Before this story truly begins, I want you to imagine something simple. Picture a moment in your life when everything seemed under control, when your plans were clear. Your direction felt certain, and the future appeared predictable enough to feel safe. Most of us have experienced that feeling at least once. We believe that if we plan carefully enough, work hard enough, and make the right decisions, life will eventually reward us with stability and peace. For many years, that belief shaped my entire life. My name is Aaron, and I once believed control was the same as security. I planned everything carefully, organizing goals years in advance. I mapped relationships, career paths, and even personal growth as if life were a project waiting to be completed successfully. Planning comforted me because it created the illusion that uncertainty could be eliminated through preparation. Growing up, I was praised for being responsible. Teachers described me as disciplined, and friends relied on me because I always appeared calm and organized. Yet beneath that calmness lived fear, the fear of failure, disappointment, and most of all, unpredictability. Control became my way of protecting myself from emotional risk. At university, this mindset intensified. My days were scheduled almost down to the hour. Assignments were completed early, and opportunities were selected strategically to move me closer to a future I imagined clearly in my mind. I believed success followed effort directly. If something went wrong, it simply meant I needed to work harder. At that stage, life seemed to confirm my belief. I achieved strong results, opportunities appeared, and people admired my determination. Each success reinforced the idea that control worked. I felt proud, yet quietly tense, because maintaining control required constant vigilance. Rest felt undeserved, and relaxation felt risky. Then life introduced its first interruption. During my final year, an unexpected illness forced everything to stop. It began subtly persistent fatigue and headaches I initially ignored. I convinced myself discipline would solve the problem, so I pushed harder and rested less. Eventually, my body refused to cooperate. Doctors advised complete rest. Classes were postponed, internships canceled, and plans I had built for years dissolved within weeks. For the first time, effort alone could not fix the situation. I remember lying in bed one afternoon, staring at the ceiling, feeling anger rising inside me. This was not supposed to happen. My timeline had been disrupted, and the future I had carefully designed suddenly felt fragile. What hurt most was not the physical discomfort, but the helplessness. I tried to regain control through small actions, researching treatments obsessively, creating recovery schedules, measuring progress daily. But healing ignored my plans. Some days improved, others regressed, and recovery followed its own rhythm. The more I resisted reality, the more exhausted I became. Eventually, something shifted quietly within me. I realized my suffering came not only from illness, but from resistance itself. I was fighting reality rather than living within it. For the first time, I considered a possibility I had avoided all my life. Not everything can be controlled. Understanding this idea intellectually was easy. Accepting it emotionally was far more difficult. Months passed slowly, filled with stillness I had never allowed before. Without constant activity, deeper questions surfaced. Who am I when I am not achieving? Who am I when progress pauses? These questions unsettled me because my sense of worth had always depended on forward movement. Recovery eventually came, and I returned to university, physically stronger, but internally uncertain. I believed I had learned the lesson, yet life often repeats lessons until they are fully understood. Years later, the lesson returned again, this time through love. I met someone whose personality contrasted sharply with mine. Where I planned, she adapted. Where I sought certainty, she embraced spontaneity. At first, her calmness fascinated me. Being with her felt like stepping outside my structured world into something lighter. Slowly, however, familiar patterns reappeared. I wanted clarity about the future commitment, timelines, expectations. I believed defining everything clearly would protect the relationship. In truth, I was trying to control its natural pace. Love, however, resists control. The more I pushed for certainty, the more distance grew between us. Conversations became tense, and what I interpreted as care began to feel like pressure to her. One evening, during a quiet conversation, she said something I did not fully understand at the time. You're trying to make everything safe. But safety isn't the same as connection. Her words stayed with me long after the relationship ended. When she left, grief arrived, not as chaos, but as emptiness. Silence filled spaces once occupied by shared plans, and without someone to organize life around. My structured world felt directionless again. Once more, life presented the same lesson, and once more, I struggled to accept it. I analyzed every conversation repeatedly, searching for mistakes I could correct in hindsight, believing understanding would prevent future pain. But healing does not come from analysis alone. One quiet morning, sitting alone while my coffee slowly grew cold, I realized something simple yet profound. I had spent years trying to control outcomes instead of understanding experiences. Control had never protected me from loss. It had only delayed acceptance. That realization did not transform me instantly, but it planted a question that would slowly reshape my life. What happens if I stop forcing life to follow my plans? At that moment, I did not know the answer. I only sensed that life was beginning to teach me a lesson it would repeat again and again patiently, persistently, until I was finally ready, not just to understand it, but to live it. After the relationship ended, life did not collapse in any visible way. From the outside, everything appeared unchanged and perfectly functional. I returned to work each morning, answered emails, attended meetings, and continued fulfilling responsibilities exactly as before. Conversations continued, deadlines arrived on schedule, and daily obligations demanded attention without pause. Nothing dramatic signaled that something within me had shifted, yet internally, a quiet instability lingered. Subtle but persistent, like an imbalance only I could feel. I noticed it most during ordinary moments walking home after work, sitting alone during lunch, or standing silently while waiting for the elevator. There was a strange sensation that my life was moving forward without direction, as if I were continuing routines that no longer connected to the person I was slowly becoming. For years, achievement had guided me. Goals, structured uncertainty, and progress reassured me that everything was moving correctly. Now accomplishment felt unexpectedly hollow. I completed tasks efficiently, yet satisfaction disappeared almost immediately. One evening, After finishing a long project that once would have felt deeply meaningful, I sat at my desk expecting relief or pride. Instead, I felt nothing, not disappointment, not happiness, only emptiness. That absence frightened me more than failure ever had. Failure at least carries emotion. Emptiness feels like silence, where meaning once existed. I began questioning things I had never allowed myself to question before. Why was I working so hard? What exactly was I moving toward? Was success truly my desire, or simply something I had learned to pursue without reflection? These questions followed me quietly through my days. At first, I resisted them because questioning stability felt irresponsible. I reassured myself that uncertainty was temporary and that motivation would eventually return. But motivation did not come back in the familiar way. Instead, a different kind of fatigue appeared, not physical exhaustion, but emotional tiredness. I felt tired of striving without understanding why. Tired of measuring my worth through productivity, and tired of constantly preparing for a future that never seemed to fully arrive. Around this time, my company introduced an international collaboration project that required meetings conducted in English, something that would once have intimidated me greatly. In the past, I avoided speaking unless absolutely necessary, preferring preparation over spontaneity. During one meeting, however, a colleague asked directly for my opinion. There was no time to rehearse or refine my response. For a brief moment, fear returned, the familiar fear of sounding inadequate. Then, unexpectedly, I spoke anyway. My sentences were imperfect. I paused often, searched for vocabulary, and corrected myself mid-sentence. Yet the discussion continued naturally. No one reacted negatively, and no one seemed concerned about my hesitation. The meeting ended, and everyone moved on, but I remained still, reflecting on what had happened. I had participated without certainty, and nothing terrible occurred. That realization stayed with me far longer than I expected. English gradually began to represent something beyond communication. Speaking another language required acceptance of imperfection and patience with limitations. It removed the illusion of control I had depended on for years. In English, I could not appear flawless. I could only remain present. This intrigued me deeply. I started listening to English podcasts during my commute. At first, understanding required effort, and I replayed sentences repeatedly. Progress felt slow, yet unlike many other pursuits, I felt no pressure to excel quickly. Learning became exploration rather than performance. Over time, subtle changes appeared. I listened more carefully, paying attention to tone, pauses, and rhythm instead of demanding immediate comprehension. Partial understanding became enough. That acceptance began influencing other parts of my life. I stopped demanding instant clarity from myself and allowed uncertainty to exist without rushing toward conclusions. Even my thinking slowed. Instead of reacting immediately to discomfort, I observed it. Instead of analyzing emotions instantly, I allowed myself to feel them first. English, unexpectedly, was teaching me patience. One evening, while practicing pronunciation alone at home, I laughed after mispronouncing the same word repeatedly. The laughter surprised me. In the past, mistakes frustrated me. Now they felt human. I realized how harshly I had treated myself for years, interpreting every mistake as evidence of inadequacy. Learning a language made perfection impossible, and that impossibility created freedom. I began attending online conversation sessions with strangers from different countries. None of us were fluent. Everyone hesitated and searched for words, yet communication still happened. Meaning emerged despite imperfection. This experience challenged one of my deepest beliefs, that value depended on precision and control. Connection, I discovered, depended on willingness. Externally, my daily life remained mostly unchanged, but internally, curiosity replaced pressure. I experimented with new routines without expecting mastery, allowed evenings without productivity, and walked through the city without distractions, simply observing life around me. For the first time in years, life felt less like a project to complete and more like a process to experience. Difficult days still appeared, and doubt occasionally returned. I wondered whether this slower pace meant losing ambition. Gradually, however, I understood something important. Ambition driven by fear exhausts you, while growth driven by curiosity sustains you. English came to symbolize that curiosity. Each new word expanded possibility slightly, and each conversation reminded me that progress comes through participation, not endless preparation. I stopped asking whether I was improving fast enough, and instead asked whether I was showing up consistently. That shift changed everything. Conversations at work became calmer. I listened more attentively and no longer rushed to defend ideas. Silence felt less threatening. Relationships also changed, without trying to control outcomes. Interactions felt lighter and more genuine. Slowly, almost invisibly, confidence returned, not the confident image I once tried to project, but a quieter form rooted in acceptance. It was the confidence of someone who no longer required guarantees before beginning. Looking back, I realized my earlier life had been guided largely by fear, disguised as discipline. Now curiosity was beginning to guide me instead. I still did not know where this path would lead, but for the first time, not knowing felt acceptably even hopeful. Uncertainty no longer signified failure. It suggested possibility. And possibility, I was beginning to understand, is where real change quietly begins, growing in ordinary moments long before we recognize its power. There is a stage in personal change that feels almost invisible, a quiet transition that happens beneath the surface of everyday life. Nothing dramatic announces its arrival. There is no single morning when you wake up and suddenly realize that everything has changed. Instead, transformation comes gently, almost unnoticed, shaped through repetition and through small decisions made differently than before. That was the stage I entered without fully recognizing it at first. From the outside, my routines appeared unchanged. I still woke up at the same hour, traveled along the same familiar streets, and completed similar responsibilities at work. Yet, internally, something essential had softened, as if a constant tension I once carried had slowly dissolved without my awareness. I no longer rushed through my days the way I used to. In the past, every action carried urgency, as though time itself were chasing me. Even rest had required justification, carefully scheduled and measured to remain productive. Now moments began to stretch naturally. I lingered longer over my morning coffee, noticing warmth, silence, and light in ways I had previously ignored. I listened more attentively when people spoke, no longer preparing responses before they finished. Conversations ended naturally without my need to control outcomes. These adjustments seemed small, almost insignificant, yet they transformed how time felt. Days no longer blurred together in exhaustion. Instead, they unfolded with texture and presence. English continued to accompany this internal shift in unexpected ways. Speaking another language required full attention. I could not rely on automatic reactions or familiar expressions. Every sentence demanded awareness, forcing me to remain present. And attention gradually reshaped perception. I noticed myself thinking differently, not only in English, but about my life itself. Translating thoughts between languages required patience. Some emotions resisted translation, while certain ideas felt clearer in one language than another. This fascinated me deeply. Language revealed how flexible understanding could be. If meaning changed depending on words, perhaps identity itself could change depending on awareness. This realization quietly opened something inside me. For years, I had believed personality was fixed. I described myself using stable labels: organized, cautious, responsibly. Those descriptions once felt comforting. They created predictability, but now they felt restrictive. I began questioning whether I was truly defined by who I had been. Perhaps identity was not permanent, but continuously shaped through experience and reflection. Around this time, I accepted an opportunity to participate in an international training program connected to my work, which required regular discussions in English with participants from different countries. The first session made me nervous not because I feared failure, but because speaking meant revealing uncertainty. Yet, something unexpected happened. Everyone struggled occasionally. Even fluent speakers searched for words. Accents differed. Grammar mistakes appeared constantly, and still communication flowed. People listened patiently. Ideas mattered more than perfection. Gradually, I began contributing more actively. My sentences were sometimes simple, and I often paused to reorganize my thoughts. But each attempt strengthened a quiet realization. Mastery was not required to belong. Belonging came from participation. This lesson extended beyond language learning into emotional life itself. Instead of waiting for perfect confidence before expressing opinions, I spoke honestly. Instead of avoiding uncomfortable conversations, I approached them gently and openly. Relationships responded almost immediately. Friends shared more openly. Colleagues engaged with greater trust. Even disagreements felt less threatening. When you stop protecting an image of yourself, connection becomes easier and more authentic. One evening, after an online discussion, I closed my laptop and sat quietly, realizing how different I felt compared to a year earlier. I was still the same person, yet I was no longer living defensively. Defensiveness had guided many of my earlier choices. I pursued certainty to protect myself from disappointment and planned excessively to avoid vulnerability. Now I understood something essential. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is participation without guarantees. Learning English had unknowingly trained this mindset. Every conversation involved risk, and every attempt carried the possibility of misunderstanding. Yet progress depended on continuing anyway. life worked in much the same way. Gradually, my relationship with failure changed. Mistakes at work no longer felt catastrophic. Miscommunication became an opportunity for clarity rather than proof of incompetence. Emotional misunderstandings transformed into conversations instead of conflicts. I noticed how much energy I had once spent anticipating problems. That energy slowly redirected toward presence, and presence felt lighter, calmer, and more sustainable. I also began exploring interests I had postponed for years, reading purely out of curiosity, attending small cultural events, and traveling alone on short weekend trips without detailed planning. These experiences were modest yet deeply meaningful. For the first time, I allowed experiences to exist without needing them to serve long-term goals. Life felt less like preparation for something important and more like active participation in the present moment. Uncertainty about the future still existed. Career direction continued evolving, and relationships unfolded slowly. Nothing felt perfectly secure, yet insecurity no longer frightened me as it once had. I realized certainty had never truly existed, only the illusion of control. Releasing that illusion created unexpected freedom. One conversation during the training program stayed with me. A participant said simply, "Learning another language teaches you patience with yourself." The sentence resonated immediately because patience had long been absent from my life. I once demanded rapid improvement, immediate clarity, and predictable outcomes. Now, patience felt natural. I trusted gradual progress and believed understanding develops over time. Most importantly, I trusted myself to navigate uncertainty. That trust marked a profound shift. I was no longer trying to become a better version of my past self. I was becoming someone new through lived experience, quietly, steadily, without dramatic transformation. English had begun as a professional necessity, but evolved into a psychological practice. A daily reminder that growth requires humility, that confidence follows effort, and that participation matters far more than perfection. Slowly, without announcing itself, purpose began returning, not as a grand mission, but as direction. My life felt as though it was moving forward again, guided less by rigid plans and more by awareness. For the first time in years, curiosity about the future replaced anxiety. I did not know exactly where I was going, but I trusted my ability to continue learning along the way, adapting step by step. And that quiet trust felt stronger, deeper, and far more liberating than certainty had ever been. Looking back now, I realize that transformation rarely feels dramatic while it is happening. There was no single morning when I woke up feeling entirely different. No clear boundary separating who I once was from who I had gradually become. Change unfolded quietly through hundreds of ordinary days lived with slightly more awareness than before. Life itself continued in familiar rhythms. Work responsibilities remained unchanged. Bills still needed attention, and schedules continued to organize my time. Yet, beneath these routines, something essential had shifted. I was no longer living in constant anticipation of the future. For many years, my attention had always existed somewhere ahead, waiting for the next achievement, the next moment of certainty, the next stage when life would finally feel stable enough to enjoy. Now enjoyment appeared naturally, within ordinary moments, a conversation flowing without effort, a peaceful walk home beneath soft evening light, or the comfort of silence that no longer felt like loneliness. I began to understand that peace is not created by controlling circumstances, but grows slowly from acceptance. Acceptance did not mean abandoning ambition or desire. It meant releasing the belief that happiness could only exist once everything became perfect. Challenges still appeared. Projects sometimes failed. Plans changed unexpectedly, and relationships continued to require patience and care. But difficulties no longer felt like threats to my identity. They became experiences to move through, rather than problems demanding immediate elimination. One afternoon, during another international meeting, I noticed something that once would have seemed impossibly was speaking English freely, expressing ideas without rehearsing every sentence in my mind. I still hesitated occasionally and searched for words, but hesitation no longer embarrassed me. It simply meant I was thinking carefully. After the meeting ended, I sat quietly, recognizing how far I had come, not only in fluency but in mindset. Learning English had taught me something deeper than vocabulary or grammar. It had taught tolerance for imperfection. Every conversation required courage. Every misunderstanding required patience, and every correction demanded humility. Gradually, these qualities reshaped how I approached life itself. I stopped waiting to feel completely prepared before acting. I stopped assuming uncertainty meant danger. I stopped measuring my worth through flawless performance and instead measured progress through participation, showing up, engaging honestly, and remaining willing to learn. Around this time, I reconnected with people from earlier stages of my life. Some conversations felt familiar and easy, while others revealed how much I had changed. I noticed I no longer depended on approval in the same way. Connection still mattered, but self-understanding mattered more. I listened without trying to impress and spoke without excessive explanation. Disagreements no longer felt like rejection. This emotional steadiness surprised me because, in the past, I believed confidence meant certainty. Now I understood confidence as flexibility, the ability to adapt, remain open, and continue learning even without guarantees. One evening, I walked through the city just after rain had ended. The streets reflected soft lights, while people moved quietly around me. Nothing extraordinary happened, yet I felt deeply present. I realized I was no longer rushing toward another version of life. I was already inside it. For years, I believed purpose would arrive as clarity, a defined path or moment of absolute understanding. Instead, purpose emerged through attention, through choosing curiosity over fear, and through engaging fully with experiences rather than controlling them. Purpose, I discovered, is less about destination and more about participation. English remained part of this participation. Each conversation reminded me that understanding grows through effort and that mistakes are not interruptions, but essential parts of progress. Language learning mirrored life itself. You begin unsure, misunderstand often, try again, and gradually meaning forms. Fluency develops through persistence, not perfection. Life follows the same pattern. We learn by living imperfectly, grow by staying engaged, and connect by risking misunderstanding. There are still days when doubt appears and old habits briefly return, but now I recognize them gently. Growth does not erase the past. It changes our relationship with it. I no longer regret periods of uncertainty, illness, or heartbreak that once felt overwhelming. Those experiences interrupted my illusion of control and guided me toward awareness. Without them, I might have continued living efficiently but unconsciously. Now awareness shapes my choices. I allow rest without guilt, pursue challenges without demanding certainty, and accept that life will continue changing. Instead of resisting change, I move with it. If you are listening to this story and feel uncertain about your own path, I offer something simple. You do not need everything figured out, perfect confidence, or flawless English. You only need willingness, the willingness to try, to listen, and to remain present even when progress feels slow. Learning a language teaches patience. Living teaches humility. Together, they teach something even more valuable, the ability to begin again, again and again. Today, my life is not perfectly controlled or completely predictable, but it feels real. I wake up curious rather than anxious. I participate instead of endlessly preparing. I speak even when unsure, trusting that understanding will follow effort. That quiet internal shift has changed everything. The journey continues, bringing new lessons, misunderstandings, and beginnings. But I am no longer waiting for life to start. I am living it now, one conversation, one experience, one imperfect sentence at a time. And in embracing that imperfect progress, I have discovered a calm sense of fulfillment that once felt impossibly distant, yet now accompanies me every day. Somehow, gently and unexpectedly, that is enough.